to go back to what we were talking about earlier in brokered conventions, if I can toot my own horn just a little bit here, I've produced a video that's going to be up tomorrow about noon, and it's drawing parallels between this Republican nomination and the one that took place in 1912. And I think I've heard people comparing this one to 1968 and how the Democrats nominated Hubert Humphrey over the will of the primary voters who voted for Eugene McCarthy, and basically anyone but LBJ, you know. But I think 1912 might be even more applicable, because what happened after the 1968 nomination is that the Democrats were disheartened but did not split. What happened in 1912 was there was a fight on the convention floor between Roosevelt and Taft. The party nominated Taft over Roosevelt, even though Roosevelt had won 9 of 12 primaries. And then what actually happened was the party split. You had the Progressive Party, the Bull Moose Party, the Republicans. They split 50% of the vote, handed the election to Woodrow Wilson with about 40% of the vote. And from what I can tell in reading the news, is that the Republicans are ready to contest the election, contest the convention, and should they lose, they're planning on doing a third-party run, whether it be a conservative third party or some sort of desperate establishment third party. And in any case, if they pull off shenanigans at the convention, then Trump will probably be the one that runs third. I think the possibility of a true schism is very real. And so I think 1912 is a good example.
When I said if they want to sink the ship that is the Republican Party. I mean, like, Trump just embodies everything about what you just said that disgust a big percentage of the voting base. They're sick of these guys running the entire show, saying, we don't care what you people say, it's going to be one of our guys. It's going to be an establishment guy. That's what you saw with Mitt Romney. And just the disgust when I see him doing what he did the other day, comparison to when he was running and Trump was giving him money, just setting up there, he's just so great. It's awesome to have this endorsement. He embodies everything we stand for. And then turn around and when you see those clips back to back, it's disgusting. That's why it doesn't matter what they do, how much they try to destroy Trump's reputation, it's not going to work with his voting base.
But
no matter how much the media tries, no matter how much the Republican establishment tries, no matter how much the Democrats try, it's not going to work.
I don't mean to filibuster here, but I do have a little bit of input as well on this, though, and that is that the Republican establishment might be betraying the will of their base. However, they are being strategic, and what I mean by that is that the demographic map, the math of the general election, was already unfavorable for the Republicans going into 2016. Any generic Democrat could probably expect to win about 257 electoral votes of the 270 necessary. There's only about 9 states nowadays that one could really consider a swing state, which means that, actually I have it written down here, if the Democrats were to win with their 257, any generic Democrat, either Florida, Ohio, Virginia, or North Carolina, any of those 4 swing states, and they've got the 270, the election's over. Any combination of Missouri, Colorado, Iowa, West Virginia, Arizona will do the same thing. And so the challenge for the Republicans is they were going to have to win basically 9 swing states in 2016 in order to win the White House. That was already looking unlikely even if you just take Jeb Bush or some sort of really generic palatable Republican, that was already looking unlikely. You take someone like Donald Trump and that becomes infinitely less likely. And so I think
it's more likely because he's going to get so many votes from Democrats. I mean, I've seen Bernie Sanders voters saying, I'm going to go to him. I mean, what you just said makes no sense to me, because unless they do what Trump wants to do, they're never going to win another election, ever. You have to stop illegal immigration.
I think
you have to stop the bleeding of that demographics change.
Right, yeah.
That's what's really going on, and half the people I know do not see it.
I think it's false to assume
the scenario where they're never going to win another election unless they listen to Trump.
I think it's false to assume that
split their own throat and die. Either way.
Yeah. Are you done? Because I keep cutting you off. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Well, I was just going to say that it is false to assume that whoever runs whoever ends up splitting the Republican Party, which I do feel like the Republican Party this could go bad for the Republican Party this year, and everybody knows it. But I
Because
think,
they just won't let the person that's supposed to win.
well, but
I mean, how dumb is this?
even if Trump wins the nomination, well, he should. I mean, Trump, if he loses the nomination, I'd be very surprised
Yeah,
at this point.
it's a complete ripoff if he loses.
Right, but you're going to have a lot of
Bernie
people that are.
Sanders is doing a little better. The Democrats would be willing to do the same thing to him.
You're going to have a lot of people that are upset, and so you're going to have a split for sure. You're going to have people that refuse to either vote for Trump, or you're going to have people that refuse to support Cruz or Rubio.
They will ensure Hillary wins.
Well, that's a little
Self-centered they are.
That's a little false, like to me, like to assume that
No, if
a
they
group of
split
people
the
that
vote, if they run a third party, Hillary wins. If she's not in prison.
to assume that these people who do split the Republican Party, like you're kind of contradicting yourself, Robert, because you actually just said that Trump gets a lot of support from Democrats or independents, which I think is true. Like, although I do think a lot of people from
the people who are on the other side that are upset for the exact same reasons.
Yeah, but I just think that
Hillary's
we think
people
that
aren't going to vote for Donald. Some of Bernie's will.
I think as pundits we just assume that we've got voters figured out when we don't. The majority of people in this country are independent. That's a fact. They're not strongly partisan on either side. And the majority of this country would be what I classify as moderate. Their views evolve. Okay, their views change when they're brought new information, and I think the evidence is shaky at best throughout American history to assume, like say the election of 2000, that Ralph Nader prevented Al Gore from winning that election. Well, if you actually examine that, the evidence is shaky. There's not really a lot of the votes.
Nader got 10,000 votes in Florida. How many of those 10,000 would have voted for a Republican? It's the Green Party.
No.
I mean, what was it,
no.
548 votes that Gore lost by?
Yeah, but that's assuming those people would have voted for Democrat otherwise. These people probably wouldn't have voted otherwise. That's my point, is that
I mean, they're communist, socialist party. What else are they going to vote for? They're not voting for Bush.
No, but listen to what I said again. These voters are not going to vote for a candidate that they don't like, and so that means they're either not going to vote at all.
Every time I vote, I had to do it last Tuesday.
Not it.
And I've got to have a I voted sticker.
But not everybody's like you, Robert. I think a lot of people, if they don't like the candidates, they're either going to vote for a third-party candidate or they're not going to vote at all. And this kind of leads to what I was going to bring up later on here, where we look at voter turnout, which still is historically low. Like we look at, especially at the primary level, and these caucuses and primaries, they hardly anybody. I mean, I went to the caucus today because it's when we're recording this. This is March 5th. It's Kansas has today, so I show up and I'm the youngest person in the room by far. Okay, so we have a lot of people that are pretty much deciding the fate of a candidate for a major political party who don't represent the majority of Americans here. So a lot of people feel like, what's the point? You know, the Electoral College is a discussion we could have, you know, an entire podcast on, and about how archaic it is now. And I think
please do. I mean,
yeah, I mean.
Also, the fact that caucuses take so long. I think it's good that Kansas has theirs on a Saturday. That's a little different. But like Iowa, for example, if you're a working person, you work an 8-hour day. You got kids at home that come home from school or whatever, and then you got to go to a 3-hour caucus in order to participate in the democracy and have a say in the nominee of your party. I think is a little bit undemocratic, to say the least. I mean, at least you are voting.
Yeah, you're definitely not making it easy.
High. Yeah, you're setting the bar incredibly high for someone who, you know, I mean, if the idea of a democracy is to get normal people to come out and participate, and of course that's what the parties want. The parties want normal people to come out and get involved. Then a caucus is the exact way to make sure the opposite happens.
Yeah.
Can I interject really quick here on Earlier, I didn't mean to sound like a presumptuous Democrat and be like, oh, 257, we're on the verge of 270, what an easy election. It would be very presumptuous and false to assume that Donald Trump would not be a formidable general election candidate. I was just talking more about general trends in the Electoral College, and some of the math, though, is pretty stacked against Trump. And we mentioned Hispanic voters. You know, George W. Bush in 2004 raked in about 44% of the Hispanic vote, and that played a big part in his win. Mitt Romney in 2012 got about 27%, something like that, and he was clobbered, and in the Electoral College, that is. And over time, that demographic continues to grow. And so I think that there are some major mathematical issues for any Republican candidate, but especially Donald Trump, who's got an 80% unfavorability rating with Hispanics that would put the wins against his sales in a general election.
But I've seen plenty, I mean, it could just be they're trotting them out there, but I've seen plenty of Hispanics that support Trump. I've got students I teach who are Hispanic who are going to vote for Donald Trump.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure there are people. I mean, like I said, that if 8 of 10 don't like him, that means 2 of 10 probably do.
And they
But the
say,
overall numbers and trends don't seem to point in that direction.
well, it's got to point towards stuff like him saying, I support Planned Parenthood. You've got to start pulling people from the middle, too.
Mm-hmm.
When he goes out there and he contradicts the Republican establishment on a lot of things. I mean, the guy used to be very liberal.
Yeah, it's like the Iraq War is a great example too. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes Donald Trump
whole long line
speaks
of
and
things.
I'm just like, who are you? Like, you're all over the place, and he contradicts himself all the time too. I'm just
Person who thinks for himself.
well, yeah, and
I
and
also
He
think
will change his views whenever he thinks it makes sense.
yeah, you're right.
to go into a little bit more, I think 2008 was the most high turnout election in recent history, about 60% almost.
Yeah.
Compare that to 2014, which was like 30 something, really pathetic. One trend on the Republican side right now is a high turnout. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Donald Trump is in the race. I think, though, that in a general election, that Donald Trump's presence would boost turnout all over the place for liberal Democrats as well, who are afraid of a Donald Trump or a Ted Cruz getting a Supreme Court nomination. And so I think there might be some crossover independent voters going for Trump. I think it would also be unwise to underestimate the intense reaction and probably high turnout of people who go out specifically just to vote against Donald Trump.
Oh, they'd be busting them in for the thousands.
Yeah, I
It will
agree.
be.
I think that we peaked at with voter turnout in the general election in the 1880s. Like, if you look at between the time of Jackson, when for the first time you had common people common men, they were able to vote, up until the really the turn of the 20th century. But it peaked with the election of 1876, when you had about 82% of anybody who was eligible to vote could vote in that election. And that was a highly disputed election, extremely close. That was the one where Tilden won the popular vote, 250,000 votes over Rutherford Hayes, but Hayes won the electoral vote by one vote.
Elections.
Yeah, because of the Compromise of 1877, and of course there was some shadiness that went along with that. But there was a deal that was made in Reconstruction, so it worked out. We didn't have to go to a war with each other again. But the point is that was a big reason why that voter turnout was so high. And like you said, Will, I agree that if you have Trump that has a good chance in the general, you will see a much more people get involved just to vote against Trump. And I can tell you today, at the caucus that I was at, I did go to the Republican one this year. Sometimes I do Democrats. I'll just full disclosure on that. But I will tell you that there were people there that were exclusively there to vote against Trump. And that was interesting to me, because you basically have, I think, fear driving a lot of this election. Whenever fear is involved, whenever there's emotion, this pure emotion, then more people do get involved. And I think turnout will be probably, who knows, 65, 70%?
Thinking with logic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of that going on.
I can tell you that if I can be a little bit more open with you guys for a second, I can tell you my honest feeling is that I do have some fear in this election. Yeah, I felt emotion in the 2008 election. It was my first general election I ever voted in. And in 2012, I didn't feel so much passion. It was just an election. I enjoyed it because I'm a political science kind of person. But I'm feeling those emotions again in 2016. And I think that's probably how a lot of the country is feeling right now. And I think that means that a high turnout is a very high probability. Very high probability. That's not empirical. That's my gut telling me that, which is why I prefaced it the way I did.
Not just fear, but rage. I mean, rage on. Yeah. I think Sanders supporters they're angry. They're angry at the wealth disparity, the 1% and all that, and then
college debt.
College debt. Yeah, Trump supporters are angry as well at the establishment in general. Who they feel like their voice is not being heard, and
you have the Ted Cruz and the Tea Party anger.
Yeah.
You have
now you have establishment
the Clinton machine. I mean, what better symbol is there of the establishment than the Clinton regime?
Well, let's talk hypotheticals here. Like, let's say Clinton does win the nomination. She's got a strong lead now, but it isn't over. But say Clinton wins the nomination. Say Trump wins the nomination, because he's got a strong lead as well. Wouldn't you think that there would automatically be a third force out there that hates both Trump and Clinton? Because again, we're talking a lot about anecdotal stuff, which you should always avoid. But when I talk to colleagues and friends, it seems like they equally hate both Clinton and Trump. They're like, and not only that, they'd be willing to vote for anybody against those two. If you coalesce even a mediocre candidate like Michael Bloomberg, who, in my opinion, there's nothing really special about him other than the fact he's just another billionaire. And yeah, he was, I guess, a decent mayor of New York.
I haven't answered your question, Matt. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say that you're missing one piece of the puzzle, Matt, in your question, and that is that voters don't like Hillary Clinton. You're right. About 60% of independent voters don't like Hillary Clinton. Her likability is pretty low. Her unfavorability is pretty high, better said. But the piece of the puzzle you're missing, and Christy Winters actually pointed this out to me as I was talking to her today, so credit if she's watching this, is that people don't like Hillary Clinton, but when you poll them on whether they see her as a strong leader, on whether they see her as a presidential material, that the majority of people, even if they don't like her, see her that way. And I think that's probably the major difference with Trump is that people, I think the majority of people don't see Trump as presidential material. They see him as a reality TV star. But that might just be my bias sweeping in.
What do you think, Robert? Do you think that's possible, that a third option would rise?
I mean, I said it a while ago, if the Republicans try to do it, they're just handing it to Hillary. I mean, that just shows they would rather have her president than admit that Trump won the Republican nomination or to back him any at all. The Republican Party is more important to them than the country.
My interesting takeaway is whenever you see these polls that say who would you rather vote for, Trump or Hillary, it never gets near to 100% when you add up the percentages. There usually is anywhere between 15 to 20% that would say neither, that both are horrible. To me, I think this is an opportunity for a year, and I know that the Electoral College makes this extremely difficult for us to truly have a democracy for the presidential election. We know that. That's
a good point I've never really thought of, I don't think. Third party, you can't get that majority.
Well, but the majority, like say there is a situation, again, just like this election of 1824, where there's a plurality, but there's not a majority. Andrew Jackson that year won the plurality, but you have a situation where they have to take to the House of Representatives.
I think a third party run would also, to go back to 1912, would probably look more like that, like a 25-25-40 split, in which case the plurality will win. In the case of 1912, it was Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, he barely won that plurality, or that was the.
The Electoral College itself was
even
overwhelming.
1860.
Oh, the Electoral College, yeah.
Lincoln
Yeah,
had like 40% of the vote, which meant
Yeah.
6 out of 10 voters did not want that man president. And
I
look
think
what happened.
Yeah, I think the silent majority is actually the non supporters of Clinton, Sanders, and Trump and Cruz. Like I think the people that don't participate in the primaries and caucuses is who we never hear from. And I feel like we keep going back to turnout. I feel like the turnout will be higher, which would favor some kind of third option. And the most recent example of this we have
But how
is
would you
Ross
get
Perot.
someone even on the name alone
Well,
to surpass Clinton and Trump? I mean,
well, I
who
mean,
would that have to be?
Trump was not expected to do anything a year ago. I mean, that surprised everyone.
Just
I mean,
his name recognition alone and the fact the media is obsessed with him.
Bloomberg has
The
the
people who
name
hate him
recognition.
promote him more than anyone else.
the thing about Trump though is that
Authors
because
think, hey, I like Trump, I support Trump, Trump this, Trump that. No, his name is out there because people who dislike him will not shut up about it.
I think one major detail that we also should address is that with people like Trump and Hillary, they're known quantities, they're known factors. People know who Trump are, people know who Hillary are. And most people probably already have their minds made up about those people. They probably know in the back of their head how they would vote, who they would vote for, who they would never vote for. That would not be the case if, like, flip it and say we had like Martin O'Malley and Ted Cruz or something. Like, those are not nationally known quantities at this point. And so people would be mulling and learning and fighting. And with Trump and Hillary, we can probably expect those numbers to stay where they are. Likability, unfavorability,
Right.
chances of voting for them would all be pretty level.
So I said it about Trump a while ago. The people who are going to support him are going to support him. You will not change their mind. It's the same with Hillary. I mean, there are this hardcore fanatical group that it's just Hillary's the person. We're voting for her because she's a woman, or we're voting for her because she's Hillary. They're not going to change their mind.
Yeah,
So I don't see
I
where
agree.
you could get someone with a big enough, just name alone.
No,
Much less unifying people on a political field. I mean, how would you herd Bernie Sanders supporters and win with anyone else?
Let's take Bernie Sanders. Like, say, I know this is far-fetched, but say Bernie Sanders decides not to endorse Hillary if she gets the nomination, and he says, I'm going to run as an independent still. I think it is feasible to assume that there will be enough people that are not okay with both Clinton and Trump that they would like, well, let's see what else there is an option that actually has somewhat of a chance. And if Bernie were to get 15% nationally, then he'd be guaranteed on the debate stage for the and obviously he's already on the ballot in all 50 states. And so you basically have a situation where people can actually hear his voice on the debate stage, and they would be seeking him. It's not like they would just be sitting back waiting for this information to get to them somehow. They would be seeking a third option. That's the difference here. And it's also, I think, a little false to assume that because Clinton, like, if a third party runs, you're giving the vote to Hillary. To me, that's a little. There's not really any evidence to prove that. We keep talking about the
Republicans do it.
the election of 1912. But the election of 1912, the voters were not as monolithic as we like to paint them to be. I mean,
well, they were all
there were
progressives. All three of them were progressive.
Yeah, like that was definitely a mainstream mentality then. You just had various shades of it.
The American people.
So, Matt, the reason...
Assuming they would actually watch the debates.
Well,
Matt, the reason I was...
Go ahead.
I was going to say the reason that I was presuming that a third-party run would hand the nomination, or I'm sorry, the presidency to Hillary Clinton was based on the idea that the Republicans would be the ones that would split. That the Republicans would have a conservative challenge to Donald Trump, or that Donald Trump would challenge some sort of stolen Republican nomination. In that scenario, I think it does hand the election to Hillary Clinton, and that's what I was basing
they couldn't even win the last election. I mean, like if Mitt Romney does it, that man couldn't win the last election, and a very winnable election. I mean,
yeah, you'd have to have the right
Obama
candidate.
was fighting an uphill battle to win. I mean, the Republicans, if they'd have had anybody with any appeal at all, who would have been bold enough to, attack Obama on a variety of issues, that was a winnable election. You split that vote.
As much as you guys like talk trash on the mainstream media, I feel like you're still kind of trapped in that mindset that and I'm a very idealistic person, so maybe I'm just crazy, but I do think that we shouldn't just make these assumptions based on how things have gone in the past, because who could have
For
predicted that?
reality
Who could have
now.
predicted that Sanders would be where he's at now, where he actually has a legitimate chance? Who could predict that Trump would be blowing all other Republicans out
I
of the
can see
water?
that one. I could have
But,
told you that a long time ago.
well, you're in the minority, my friend. You're in the minority. No one
I
saw
do
that
have a
in the main.
tendency to pay attention and think.
Matt, one thing I will give you is that this election has been unpredictable. You're totally right, and what you're saying about keeping our minds open and the doors, cracked, is logical based on what we've seen, because we're living through what might end up being the craziest election of all time. But that being
So
said, we
they
can only go on we can only base our opinions on what we've seen and what we think we know. And I don't think it's that far-fetched to say that if the Republicans split, that there's not going to be a bunch of Democrats voting for a Tea Party alternative. And so the idea that
will
if the
not
Republicans
happen.
split, that advantages Hillary Clinton, I think isn't too much of a stretch to project.
Yeah, that I agree, but you're making the assumption that alternative would be a Tea Party alternative, or that alternative would
I
be
know you
someone.
want Bernie to run, Matt, but he can't run and win.
No, I'm
It will not
no.
happen.
I don't want Bernie to run as a third party. In fact, I've already uh, pretty much counted him out at this point. The math doesn't work for him in the nomination process, and there's too much going on the other
But Hillary
side.
could be indicted, and I mean that could happen. I mean the FBI is said in about 2 months they're going to
He's
hand over a mountain of evidence. She's already up to 16 felonies that are likely to be placed against her. It's will Loretta Lynch do it? If she doesn't, then that could destroy the Democrat Party. We could see the destruction of both the political parties.